The wind howled like a wounded beast, tearing through the dense forest with a ferocity that seemed almost alive. Snowflakes, sharp as needles, swirled in the air, reducing visibility to mere feet. The blizzard had come without warning, blanketing the world in a thick, white shroud. Somewhere in the heart of this frozen wilderness, a German shepherd named Luna struggled to keep her newborn puppies warm. She had dug a shallow den beneath the roots of an ancient oak tree, but even there, the cold seeped in, biting at her fur and chilling her to the bone. Luna was no ordinary dog. She was a survivor, a creature of instinct and intelligence. Her golden brown eyes glowed with determination as she nuzzled her 3 tiny puppies, their soft whimpers barely audible over the storm. She had been a stray for as long as she could remember, roaming the forest and fending for herself. But now, she had a purpose greater than her own survival: her pups. The storm grew worse as the hours passed. The temperature plummeted, and the snow piled higher, threatening to bury the den. Luna's instinct screamed at her to move, to find safer shelter, but she hesitated. Her puppies were too young, too fragile to face the elements. She curled her body tighter around them, shielding them with her warmth. But even her fierce love couldn't stop the inevitable. By dawn, the storm showed no signs of relenting. Luna's heart sank as she noticed one of her puppies, the smallest of the litter, growing weaker. His tiny body trembled, and his breathing became shallow. Desperation clawed at her chest. She licked him frantically, trying to rouse him, but he barely responded. She knew she had to do something, anything, to save him. With a heavy heart, Luna made a decision. She gently picked up the limp puppy in her mouth, careful not to hurt him, and stepped out into the blizzard. The cold hit her like a wall, but she pressed on, driven by a mother's love. She had no plan, no destination in mind. All she knew was that she had to find help. The forest was a labyrinth of snow and shadows. Every step was a battle against the wind and the biting cold. Luna's paws sank into the deep snow, and her muscles burned with exhaustion. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. The weight of the puppy in her mouth was a constant reminder of what was at stake. Hours passed. Or maybe it was only minutes. Time had lost all meaning in the storm. Luna's strength was fading, and her vision blurred with fatigue. Just as she was about to collapse, she saw it, a faint light in the distance. It was faint and flickering, but it was there. A spark of hope ignited in her chest. She pushed herself harder, stumbling through the snow toward the light. As she drew closer, the outline of a small cabin emerged from the whiteness. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the warm glow of a fire spilled from the windows. Luna's heart raced. She had found help, but would the humans inside be willing to save a puppy? Summoning the last of her strength, Luna climbed the steps to the cabin's porch. She hesitated for a moment, her instincts warring with her desperation. Then, with a soft whine, she placed the puppy gently on the wooden planks and nudged him toward the door. She backed once, a pleading sound that carried all the fear and hope in her heart. Inside the cabin, a man named Jacob sat by the fire, sipping a cup of hot tea. He was a recluse, a man who had chosen to live far from the noise and chaos of the world. The storm had kept him indoors all day, and he had no plans to venture outside. But then he heard it, a faint bark, almost drowned out by the wind. At first, he thought he was imagining it, but when it came again, louder this time, he rose from his chair and walked to the door. He opened it cautiously, bracing himself against the cold. What he saw on his porch took his breath away. A German shepherd, her fur caked with snow, stood before him. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and hope, and at her feet lay a tiny, lifeless puppy. Jacob's heart clenched. He had seen many things in his life, but nothing like this. Without a second thought, he scooped up the puppy and ushered the dog inside. The warmth of the cabin enveloped them. But Jacob knew the real battle was just beginning. The cabin was a sanctuary from the storm, its walls thick and sturdy, its interior warm and inviting. Jacob quickly shut the door behind Luna, blocking out the howling wind and the biting cold. He knelt on the wooden floor, cradling the tiny puppy in his hands. The little creature was ice cold, his body limp and unresponsive. Luna watched anxiously, her golden eyes fixed on Jacob. She didn't understand what he was doing, but she trusted him, not because she knew him, but because she had no other choice. Her instincts told her that this man was her only hope. Jacob's mind raced as he assessed the situation. He had some experience with animals, having lived in the wilderness for years, but he had never dealt with something like this. The puppy was clearly in critical condition, and time was running out. "Okay, little guy," Jacob murmured, his voice soft and soothing. "Let's see what we can do." He grabbed a thick blanket from the couch and wrapped the puppy in it, trying to warm him up. Then he placed the bundle near the fireplace, where the heat was strongest. Luna followed him, her eyes never leaving her pup. She lay down beside him, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. Jacob knew that warmth alone wouldn't be enough. The puppy needed more, much more. He rummaged through his cabinets, looking for anything that might help. He found a small bottle of rubbing alcohol and a dropper. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He dipped the dropper into the alcohol and carefully placed a few drops on the puppy's tongue. The strong smell made the little creature stir slightly, a sign that he was still alive. Encouraged, Jacob continued, gently massaging the puppy's chest to stimulate his heart. Minutes felt like hours as Jacob worked tirelessly, his hands moving with a precision born of desperation. Luna watched in silence, her breath coming in shallow pants. She wanted to help, to do something, anything, but she didn't know how. All she could do was wait and hope. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the puppy let out a weak whimper. It was the most beautiful sound Jacob had ever heard. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding and turned to Luna. "He's going to be okay," Jacob said, his voice filled with relief. "He's a fighter, just like his mom." Luna's tail thumped weakly against the floor, her eyes shining with gratitude. She nuzzled the puppy gently, her touch tender and loving. Jacob watched the two of them, his heart swelling with emotion. He had always been a solitary man, but in that moment, he felt a connection, a bond, that he hadn't felt in years. But the storm outside was far from over, and Jacob knew that their ordeal was just beginning. The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin, a fragile sense of peace had settled. The puppy, now wrapped in a warm blanket, lay nestled against Luna's side. His breathing was still shallow, but he was alive, and that was all that mattered. Jacob sat cross-legged on the floor, watching the two dogs with a mixture of awe and admiration. He had always been a man of few words, preferring the company of nature to that of people. But there was something about Luna, her courage, her determination, that touched him deeply. "You're something else. You know that," Jacob said softly, reaching out to stroke Luna's head. She didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. It was as if she understood his words, his gratitude. For the next few hours, Jacob stayed by their side, tending to the puppy and making sure Luna was comfortable. He heated some milk on the stove and fed it to the puppy drop by drop, using the dropper. It was slow, painstaking work, but Jacob didn't mind. He was determined to see the little one through this. As the hours passed, the puppy grew stronger. His whimpers became more frequent, and he even managed to open his eyes for a few seconds. Luna's tail wagged weakly every time he stirred, her relief palpable. Jacob couldn't help but marvel at the bond between mother and pup. It was a bond forged in the harshest of conditions, a testament to the power of love and survival. He found himself thinking about his own life, about the choices he had made and the solitude he had embraced. "You've got a lot to teach me, don't you?" Jacob said, more to himself than to Luna. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a quiet wisdom that seemed to transcend words. As the night wore on, the storm began to subside. The wind died down, and the snow fell more gently, blanketing the world in a serene silence. Jacob knew that the worst was over, but he also knew that their journey was far from complete. The puppy still had a long way to go before he was out of danger, and Luna needed time to recover from her ordeal. Jacob made a silent promise to himself and to them that he would do everything in his power to help them. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the snow-covered landscape. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed. The forest sparkled like a diamond, its beauty almost surreal. Inside the cabin, Jacob woke to the sound of soft whimpers. He had fallen asleep on the floor, his back against the couch. Luna and the puppy were still curled up by the fire, but the little one was stirring, his tiny paws twitching as if he were dreaming. Jacob smiled, a sense of warmth spreading through his chest. He had spent the entire night tending to the puppy, and it seemed that their efforts had paid off. The little guy was getting stronger by the hour, and Luna looked more relaxed than she had the day before. "Good morning," Jacob said, his voice groggy but cheerful. He stretched his arms and stood up, his joints protesting from the awkward sleeping position. Luna lifted her head and wagged her tail, her eyes bright with gratitude. She nudged the puppy gently, encouraging him to wake up. The little one yawned and opened his eyes, blinking up at Jacob with a mixture of curiosity and innocence. "Well, aren't you a little fighter?" Jacob said, crouching down to pick up the puppy. He cradled him in his arms, marveling at how small and fragile he was. Despite everything he had been through, the puppy seemed full of life, his tiny tail wagging as he licked Jacob's hand. Luna watched the interaction with a sense of contentment. She had trusted this man with her most precious treasure, and he had not let her down. In her eyes, Jacob was no longer a stranger. He was a friend, a protector. Jacob knew that he couldn't keep the dogs in the cabin forever. Luna was a wild creature, used to the freedom of the forest, and the puppy would need to learn how to survive in the world. But for now, they were safe, and that was all that mattered. "Let's get you two some breakfast," Jacob said, heading to the kitchen. He found some leftover meat and prepared a simple meal for Luna, then warmed more milk for the puppy. As they ate, Jacob couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. He had spent years living alone, content with his solitude. But now, with Luna and the puppy by his side, he realized how much he had been missing. The day passed in a blur of activity. Jacob cleaned the cabin, tended to the fire, and made sure the dogs were comfortable. He even ventured outside to gather more firewood, the crisp air invigorating after being cooped up for so long. By evening, the puppy was strong enough to stand on his wobbly legs. He took a few tentative steps, his tiny paws slipping on the wooden floor. Luna watched him with a mixture of pride and amusement, her tail wagging as she encouraged him. Jacob laughed, the sound echoing through the cabin. It was a sound he hadn't heard in a long time, and it felt good. "You're going to be just fine," he said, scooping up the puppy and holding him close. "Both of you." As the days turned into weeks, Jacob, Luna, and the puppy settled into a routine. The cabin, once a place of solitude, was now filled with life and laughter. Jacob had named the puppy Max, a name that seemed to suit his spirited personality. Max grew stronger with each passing day, his playful antics bringing joy to both Jacob and Luna. He was a curious little thing, always exploring his surroundings and getting into mischief. Luna, ever the patient mother, kept a watchful eye on him, her love for him evident in every gesture. Jacob found himself growing attached to the two dogs in ways he hadn't expected. They had brought a sense of purpose to his life, a reminder that even in the harshest of conditions, there was always hope. But as much as he wanted to keep them with him, Jacob knew that Luna and Max belonged to the wild. They were creatures of the forest, and no matter how much they had come to mean to him, he couldn't take that away from them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jacob sat on the porch with Luna by his side. Max was curled up in her lap, fast asleep. The forest was quiet, the only sound the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. "You know," Jacob said, his voice soft, "I'm going to miss you too when you're gone." Luna looked up at him, her eyes filled with understanding. She nuzzled his hand, as if to say that she would miss him too. Jacob smiled, a bittersweet feeling settling in his chest. He knew that the time was coming when Luna and Max would have to return to the wild. But he also knew that they would always be a part of him, a reminder of the bond they had shared. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Jacob made a silent promise to himself. He would cherish every moment he had with Luna and Max, and when the time came, he would let them go, not with sadness, but with gratitude for the lessons they had taught him. For now, though, they were together, and that was all that mattered. The days grew warmer as winter loosened its grip on the forest. The snow melted, revealing patches of green beneath, and the air carried the faint scent of spring. Inside the cabin, Max was growing stronger by the day. His once wobbly legs now carried him with confidence, and his playful energy filled the small space with life. Jacob watched as Max bounded across the room, chasing after a piece of string Jacob had tied to a stick. Luna sat nearby, her eyes following her pup's every move. She no longer looked as gaunt and exhausted as she had when she first arrived. The regular meals and warmth of the cabin had done wonders for her, and her coat now shone with health. But despite the joy Max brought, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that their time together was limited. Luna was a wild dog, and Max was growing into one. The forest called to them, and Jacob knew he couldn't keep them confined forever. One afternoon, Jacob decided it was time to introduce Max to the outside world. He opened the cabin door and stepped onto the porch, Max toddling behind him. The puppy hesitated at the threshold, his nose twitching as he sniffed the unfamiliar scents. "Come on, Max," Jacob encouraged, crouching down and holding out his hand. "It's not so scary out here." Luna followed, her ears perked and her tail held high. She stepped past Max and onto the porch, her movements graceful and assured. Max watched her for a moment, then took a tentative step forward. The cool breeze ruffled his fur, and he let out a small yip of excitement. Jacob smiled as Max ventured further, his curiosity overcoming his fear. The puppy sniffed at the ground, his tail wagging furiously as he discovered the world beyond the cabin. Luna stayed close, her presence a comforting reassurance for her pup. As the days passed, Jacob began taking Max and Luna on short walks around the cabin. He showed them the stream where he fetched water, the patch of wildflowers that had begun to bloom, and the tall pine trees that stood like sentinels. Max explored everything with wide-eyed wonder, while Luna kept a watchful eye on him. But as much as Jacob enjoyed these moments, he couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease in his chest. He knew that Luna and Max were not his to keep. They belonged to the wild, and sooner or later they would have to return to it. One evening, as Jacob sat by the fire with Max curled up in his lap, he heard it, a distant howl, carried on the wind. It was a sound he hadn't heard in years, and it sent a shiver down his spine. Luna's head snapped up, her ears twitching as she listened. She rose to her feet and walked to the window, her body tense. Max, sensing his mother's unease, let out a small whine. "It's okay," Jacob said, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to reassure Max or himself. "It's just the wind." But deep down, he knew it wasn't. The howl had been real, and it had stirred something in Luna. Over the next few days, she became restless, pacing the cabin and staring out the window for hours at a time. Max, too, seemed to sense a change in his mother. He followed her everywhere, his usual playfulness replaced by a quiet vigilance. Jacob knew what was happening. The wild was calling to Luna, and she was answering. He had always known this day would come, but that didn't make it any easier. One morning, Jacob woke to find Luna standing by the door, her tail wagging slowly. Max sat beside her, his eyes fixed on Jacob. It was as if they were waiting for him to understand, to let them go. Jacob's heart ached as he opened the door. Luna stepped outside, her movements deliberate and purposeful. Max hesitated, looking back at Jacob with a mixture of confusion and longing. "Go on," Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion. "You belong out there." Max took a few steps forward, then turned back and ran to Jacob, pressing his small body against his legs. Jacob knelt down and wrapped his arms around the puppy, his eyes stinging with tears. "I'll miss you, little guy," he whispered. Luna let out a soft back, and Max pulled away, his tail wagging as he joined his mother. Together, they walked into the forest, their figures growing smaller until they disappeared among the trees. Jacob stood on the porch for a long time, staring at the spot where they had vanished. The cabin felt emptier than ever, the silence pressing in on him. But as he turned to go inside, he noticed something on the ground, a single paw print, left behind as a reminder of the bond they had shared. The days that followed were difficult for Jacob. The cabin, once filled with life and laughter, now felt cold and lifeless. He found himself constantly looking out the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of Luna and Maximum. But the forest remained still, its secrets hidden beneath a canopy of green. Jacob tried to distract himself with chores, but his heart wasn't in it. He missed the sound of Max's playful barks and the way Luna would nudge his hand for attention. He missed the sense of purpose they had given him. One afternoon, as Jacob sat by the fire, he heard a faint scratching at the door. His heart leaped, and he rushed to open it, hoping to see Luna and Max waiting for him. But instead, he found a small, scruffy dog, a stray, much like Luna had been. The dog looked up at him with pleading eyes, its tail wagging tentatively. Jacob knelt down and held out his hand, and the dog crept closer, sniffing his fingers. "Where did you come from?" Jacob asked softly. The dog didn't answer, of course, but it didn't matter. Jacob knew what he had to do. He brought the dog inside, fed it, and gave it a warm place to sleep. As he watched the little creature curl up by the fire, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. Luna and Max had taught him many things, about love, about survival, about the importance of connection. And now, it was his turn to pass those lessons on. As the weeks turned into months, Jacob's cabin became a sanctuary for strays. Word seemed to spread among the animals of the forest, and soon Jacob found himself caring for a small pack of dogs. Each one had its own story, its own struggles, but they all shared one thing in common: they needed a second chance. Jacob didn't mind the chaos. In fact, he welcomed it. The dogs brought life and laughter back into his home, and he found joy in caring for them. He built a larger shelter outside, complete with warm beds and plenty of food, and he spent his days tending to their needs. But even as he embraced his new role, Jacob never forgot about Luna and Maximum. He often wondered where they were, if they were safe, if they ever thought of him. One day, as Jacob was out gathering firewood, he heard a familiar bark. He turned, his heart pounding, and there they were, Luna and Max, standing at the edge of the forest. Max had grown into a strong, confident dog, his coat gleaming in the sunlight. Luna looked just as regal as ever, her eyes filled with warmth and recognition. Jacob dropped the firewood and ran to them, his arms outstretched. Max bounded toward him, his tail wagging furiously, and Luna followed at a more dignified pace. "You came back," Jacob said, his voice choked with emotion. Luna nuzzled his hand, and Max jumped up, planting his paws on Jacob's chest. For a moment, it was as if they had never left. But Jacob knew that this was only a visit. Luna and Max were wild at heart, and they would always return to the forest. Still, he was grateful for the time they had together, for the bond that would never be broken. As the years passed, Jacob's cabin became known as a place of refuge, not just for animals, but for people as well. Travelers would stop by, drawn by stories of the man who lived in harmony with the wild. They would leave with full bellies and warm hearts, carrying with them the lessons Jacob had learned from Luna and Maximum. Jacob grew older, his hair turning gray and his steps slowing, but his spirit remained strong. He continued to care for the strays that found their way to his door, and he took comfort in the knowledge that he was making a difference. One winter evening, as Jacob sat by the fire, he heard a familiar howl outside. He smiled, knowing that Luna and Max were nearby, watching over him as they always had. He closed his eyes, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. He had lived a good life, a life filled with love and purpose. And as he drifted off to sleep, he knew that his legacy would live on, in the dogs he had saved, in the people he had touched, and in the wild hearts of Luna and Maximum. Chapter 11. The Return of the Wild ***. Years had passed since Luna and Max first walked into Jacob's life, and though they were now wild creatures of the forest, they never truly left him. Every so often, Jacob would catch a glimpse of them, a flash of golden fur among the trees, a distant howl carried on the wind. They were his silent guardians, watching over him as he continued his work. One crisp autumn morning, Jacob was out gathering herbs near the stream when he heard a rustling in the bushes. He turned, expecting to see one of the many strays he cared for, but instead, he saw Maximum. The once tiny puppy had grown into a majestic German shepherd, his coat thick and his eyes sharp with intelligence. Behind him stood Luna, her presence as regal as ever. Jacob's heart swelled with joy. "Max!" "Luna!" he called out, his voice breaking with emotion. Max bounded toward him, his tail wagging furiously, while Luna followed at a more measured pace. Jacob knelt down, wrapping his arms around Max as the dog licked his face. Luna nuzzled his hand, her eyes filled with warmth. For a moment, it was as if no time had passed. Jacob felt the same bond, the same connection that had brought them together all those years ago. But he also knew that this was a fleeting visit. Luna and Max were creatures of the wild, and their place was in the forest. "You've grown so much," Jacob said, running his hand over Max's fur. "I'm so proud of you." Luna let out a soft bark, as if to say, "We're proud of you too." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jacob sat by the stream with Luna and Max by his side. They didn't need words to communicate. Their bond transcended language. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Jacob knew that this moment would stay with him forever. Winter came early that year, blanketing the forest in a thick layer of snow. Jacob's cabin was warm and cozy, filled with the sounds of dogs barking and the crackling of the fire. But despite the chaos, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. One evening, as Jacob sat by the fire, he heard a familiar howl outside. He opened the door to find Luna and Max standing in the snow, their breath visible in the cold air. But this time, something was different. Luna's movements were slower, her once bright eyes clouded with age. Jacob's heart ached as he realized what was happening. Luna had come to say goodbye. He knelt in the snow, his hands trembling as he stroked her fur. "You've been so brave," he whispered. "You've given me so much." Luna nuzzled his hand, her touch gentle and loving. Max stood beside her, his head bowed as if he, too, understood. That night, Jacob stayed by Luna's side, holding her close as she took her final breaths. When the time came, she closed her eyes and let out a soft sigh, her body going still. Max let out a mournful howl, the sound echoing through the forest. Jacob buried Luna beneath the old oak tree where she had first brought Max to him. It was a quiet, solemn ceremony, attended only by Jacob and Maximum. As he placed the last stone on her grave, Jacob felt a profound sense of loss. But he also felt gratitude for the time they had shared, for the lessons she had taught him, and for the love that would never fade. After Luna's passing, Max stayed by Jacob's side. He had grown into a strong, loyal dog, and though he still carried the spirit of the wild, he seemed to understand that Jacob needed him now more than ever. Together, they continued Jacob's work, caring for the strays that found their way to the cabin. Max became a protector, watching over the other dogs with the same fierce love that Luna had shown him. But as the years passed, Jacob grew older. His steps slowed, and his hands trembled, but his spirit remained strong. He knew that his time was coming to an end, but he wasn't afraid. He had lived a life filled with love and purpose, and he was ready to pass the torch to the next generation. One evening, as Jacob sat by the fire with Max at his feet, He felt a sense of peace wash over him. He reached down and stroked Max's fur, his touch gentle and loving. "You've been a good friend," Jacob said softly. "Take care of them for me." Max looked up at him, his eyes filled with understanding. He let out a soft whine, as if to say, "I will. Jacob passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by the dogs he had loved and cared for. Max stayed by his side until the very end, his loyalty unwavering. When the townspeople found Jacob, they buried him beside Luna beneath the old oak tree. It was a fitting resting place for a man who had given so much to the world. Max continued to watch over the cabin, ensuring that Jacob's legacy lived on. Travelers still stopped by, drawn by the stories of the man and his dogs, and they left with full bellies and warm hearts. And though Jacob was gone, his spirit remained, in the dogs he had saved, in the people he had touched, and in the wild hearts of Luna and Maximum. Years later, a young boy stumbled upon the cabin while exploring the forest. He was cold and hungry, and he had nowhere else to go. As he approached the door, a German shepherd stepped out to greet him. The dog's coat was golden, his eyes sharp with intelligence. He looked at the boy with a mixture of curiosity and kindness, then led him inside. The cabin was warm and inviting, filled with the sounds of dogs barking and the crackling of a fire. The boy felt a sense of peace wash over him, as if he had found a place where he belonged. As he sat by the fire, the dog curled up at his feet, just as Max had done for Jacob so many years ago. And in that moment, the boy knew that he had found a new home, a place where love and loyalty would always endure. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional and captivating tales. Let us know in the comments, what do you think Max and the boy's future holds? Would you have done the same as Jacob? Share your thoughts below. Thank you for watching, and remember, love and loyalty can change the world. See you in the next video.